About 5 months ago, this company hired us for an in-person sales training event because they wanted to get their entire sales team trained under one cohesive and powerful sales process, sales methodology. At that point, the closers or the salespeople were just closing deals. Everybody was doing their own style. And the company wanted to unify the entire sales team to also make it more scalable and more efficient in terms of performance. So we flew in, we did the work, and the next month after the event, that sales team ended up collecting well over $1 million in cash, not in revenue, for the company. And this actually wasn't a pretty huge sales team of like 10 people. It was like fairly small team size. So in this video, I'm going to break down, I'm going to share with you what I taught them so that you can just literally apply and copy the principles that we cover in that workshop so that you can simply close more deals. So let's get into it. Before getting started, we're definitely going to get into the how we actually run the call and what are the words and what are the questions that we use 100%. But before we get into it, let's cover the foundations. First thing we need to understand is specifically with this method, how we break down the call. We break it down into three phases: discovery phase, presentation phase, and the objection handling phase. The reason why I put here concerns is because our method is heavily based on objection prevention and objection pre handling. So if you follow our process, you're going to eliminate most of the objections. So you're not going to have to deal with objections. So you'll have an objectionless close in most cases, or maybe you'll have to handle one or two objections. So that's why when you use our method, what you have at the end, it's more concerns, not necessarily an objection. Now, also important, being able to do objection handling is the exact same process and has the same mechanics of objection prevention, objection pre-handling. So that's why it's very important to know how to do this, because the same mechanics apply when you are preventing objections here. As you can see, visually, the discovery phase is the biggest phase, is the phase that is going to take the longest, is the most important one. And one of the biggest reasons why is because in our approach, the sale is made in the discovery. This style of closing, we make the sale, we close the deal in the discovery. When it comes to the foundations and the psychology behind that person being ready to make a decision on the call, we can know this in the discovery, by the end of the discovery. Then presentation, explaining the solution and whatnot, and then actually taking action is just a natural consequence. So discovery phase, what it is that we need to do in the discovery phase? Well, first of all, there's like a basic assessment of our ideal customer profile, just making sure that, the problem that they have is in alignment with the solution that we provide or the solution that the company provides. That's fairly simple, but that's the easy part. Now, the most important part, and here's where you bring your value as a remote closer, where you bring your skills, is this: activating the buying state. And that's why I say that the sale is made in discovery. Because if you do not activate the buying state by the end of the discovery, you're not going to close the deal. You're going to get tons of objections. You're going to have to go through unnecessary objection handling. Now, notice how I say activate the buying state. I don't say engineer the buying state, create the buying state, because one of the things with high ticket closing is that we're not magicians. Like, you cannot create out of thin air the buying state. If it wasn't there in the first place, you cannot create it. So what we need to do is we need to bring awareness through our process, through a dialogue, so that we can activate that buying state that was already inside of the person. Another word for this is a state of change. The buying state is a state of change, a state of mind where the most natural and logical next step is to take action, is to purchase the solution, because at the end of the day, businesses are solutions to problems. That's how businesses are created. There's a problem in the market, we solve it, we charge for it, boom. That's really all it is when a person is in a state of mind was very, very clear. I'm going to solve this problem. Here's my money. Let's fix this problem. Cool. So that is the goal. How do we activate the buying state? Like, what it is that we need to do during this process, besides asking questions and having a conversation, like below the surface, what it is that we're actually doing? Well, number one, we need to build a strong emotional gap, because building a strong emotional gap activates the buying state. You build a strong emotional gap with the right amount, of emotional gap, and you activate the buying state. So it's an amount of emotional gap. So it's just not simply getting some emotional gap or just pulling out some pain. We need to get it to a level, I'll share this with you in a second, where we pass a certain threshold where the buying state gets activated. That's number one. And now number two, we need to prevent objections or pre-handle objections. Otherwise, even if they have the intention to buy and the desire to buy, these objections are going to show up. And again, it's going to make everything more complicated. So that's what we do in the discovery. We build an emotional gap and we prevent objections from coming up in the first place, or we pre-handle objections. That's what we do with this method. And we do it through a conversation, through a dialogue, mainly by us asking questions. I'm going to walk you through this in a second. And then, of course, like we have presentation where we explain the solution, give them full clarity, we establish alignment, and then we enroll them. And then, of course, if there's objections and whatnot, then we have our process here. Cool. In this video specifically, we're going to focus on the discovery phase, or this series of videos. Not sure if I'm going to put it on one video, but let's get into it. Inside of the discovery phase, there's a specific framework, the specific journey we take them through, which is conformed of 5 main stages or sections, better saying. North Star, current situation, problem, pain, solution and pleasure, consequence, and ownership. We'll get into this in a second, but really what we're doing during this entire conversation at a foundational level is this. Remember, we're activating the state of change or the buying state, and then we're preventing objections. Let's just have a deeper look at the buying state, that activating, creating this state of change. The way we do it is by building an emotional gap. The way we build an emotional gap is by pulling up or pulling out or putting on top of the table pain, pleasure, and future pain. I don't really care in which proportions, because at the end of the day, these are your 3 levers. Sorry. The most important thing is that an emotional gap that is big enough is built. It really doesn't matter if the emotional gap is all built on pain, or is 50% built on pain and then 50% built on pleasure. It really does not matter. There's a little bit more nuance to that. At this stage, what you need to know is that you have 3 main levers to build an emotional gap and to create the amount, how heavy or how strong the emotional gap is. And the levers that you're going to use is present pain or current pain, pleasure, which is the emotion associated with the solution or the relief, and then future pain. Once you pass a certain threshold, we'll cover this in a second, the buying state is activated. That's number 1. Number 2, we need to prevent objections. How do we prevent objections? There are 3 core blockers or 3 core elements that hold people back. And before we get into this, just one quick thing about this visual, just to confirm. As you can see, this is our goal, and this goal is supported by these pillars. It doesn't necessarily have to be these 3 pillars, but as long as we have strong pillars so that the state stays there activated, doesn't fall, we are good. The most important thing is that you use these pillars to make sure they're strong enough to support or to activate the state of change. Just wanted to share that. Cool. So these 3 blockers, I like to call it the mentors as well, because it's very, very accurate what these actually do, and essentially are things that hold people back. And I'm going to share with you in a second why I call it dementors. But essentially, the 3 main dementors are fear. This is pure fear. It's a sense of uncertainty, and they're going to articulate it that way. The second one is what I call a well-constructed limiting belief. And if some of you are watching this video and are like, well, a well-constructed limiting belief, isn't that fear in disguise? Yes, the answer is yes. So if that was you, just put it in the comments so I know. But here's the thing. They are not going to rationalize it or perceive it as a fear. They're going to perceive it as a reality, as a belief. Okay, they don't know it's a limiting belief. It's a well-constructed story, argument, sounds and feels logical. So therefore, it needs to be treated differently. The third one is lack of ownership, or this vibe of victimism. Why, if we don't take care of these 3 things, we're not going to be able to close the deal or help the person, even if the person is in a state of change. Because a state of change, when you analyze it, is a state of creativity, of creation, of vision, of possibilities and opportunities. When we are in a state of change, the creative part of our mind is activated, and we believe it's possible. We trust ourselves. We're just tapping into this creator part of us and superpower that we have. That's actually what the state of change is, where we see what's possible. We can feel it, we can imagine it, and we can see ourselves getting there or fixing the problem. So it's an empowered state. That's the key. The state of change is an empowered state where we have high trust, high belief, high clarity, and high certainty that we can actually solve a problem. The mentors, what they actually are and what they actually do is they take away from that power, from that light. That's why it's called a mentor, because it's just literally what they do in the story. They are destructive energy. So you can build a state of change, but the person might have one or two very, very strong dementors taking away from that state of power. And that's where they start to feel doubt, insecurities, negativity, and then everything goes downhill. So that's why we not only need to activate the buying state, we need to spot. So this is a skill, developing the skill of spotting the dementors. Sometimes none of them will be there because the person, has them in check. Sometimes you will have one, you will spot one. You have to take care of this dementor in the discovery phase. Otherwise, this guy right here is going to become an objection. And it's actually way smoother and way easier to take care of a dementor in the discovery phase rather than in the objection handling phase. So you need to be able to spot them, and then you need to be able to address them, fix or reframe these things. So now there's nothing holding the person back. The person is in the state of change. Now we can go into the presentation phase. Does that make sense? Now, when it comes to the amount of emotional gap, before we get into the framework, let's cover that in a second. It's very, very simple. Before we cover this and I explain what these bars means, one thing that's very important and is a big reminder. Everything that you're going to see in a second about how to drive and how to run the call, is very, very important that you have this principle in mind that we are optimizing to build a gap. So everything we're doing on the call is with the purpose of building a gap. That's not the number one goal. So this is not a script. The goal is not to ask the questions. The goal is to build a gap. So we need to do what we need to do to build a gap. It's not, well, I asked the questions, and because I asked the questions, then I just carry on with the thing. Because if you ask the questions and you have a surface level conversation, you are not really building the gap. And then you're just going to spend 20, 25, 30 minutes in a discovery phase that is really not doing anything. You're going to present, and then you're just going to find all these objections. Also, the fact that we are optimizing for building a gap gives you flexibility. Meaning, as soon as I have the amount of gap that I needed to build, as soon as I have it, I can just go into presentation. I don't need to follow the structure in a very, very rigid way. I don't need to go from here to here, from here to here. I don't need to do this. No, 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 no. This is only a path, a guide. So, in the most effective way, and as soon as possible, you can start building the gap. But if you are here and immediately this person starts to give you opportunities for you to build the gap, you start building the gap. So in some cases, you might even skip this. You skip this, you straight go into problem. Sometimes, if you are very, very good at this, you start here. And with your first and second question, the person by themselves, they will give you what you need here. They will give you what you need here. They will give you what you need here. They will give you tangible problems. And then automatically by themselves, they will start to get down into pain. And you only ask one or two questions. That's the power of this method because it's very flexible. So let's get into gap building. We have two bars here. The red bar represents the pain, the cost, or the discomfort, however you want to look at it, of the current situation. This bar, the green bar, represents the pain or the cost of the solution. Because here's the first thing, every solution comes with pain, comes with discomfort, comes with cost, because it's energy that needs to be deployed, it's things that needs to be shifted, all patterns that we need to break. So every solution comes with a specific amount of pain. And of course, a financial cost, 100%, but also time cost and energy cost. Now, the thing is that typically solutions is an investment of resources that you do once and you get rid of a recurring problem. So this bar, the red bar, is typically a recurring problem. It's a problem that stays there month after month after month. Here, this is only you just do it once, boom, problem fixed. So this is what these bars are. This line here actually is in the wrong place. So let me just change that right away. It should go here. And what this line, this red line represents is what we call the point of no return. Once we build a gap that hits or surpass the point of no return, is when we have the right amount of gap built. And the reason why this is very important is because of the following. The human mind will have no other option than taking action towards the solution, meaning purchasing the product, when the pain of the current situation is far, far greater than the pain of the solution. Now, what does that mean? Far, far greater. Here it is 4x. When the pain of the current situation is at least 4 times higher than the pain of the solution, then as a natural consequence, we reach the point of no return. We activate the state of change, buying state, and the person, once it's presented with this cost, will take action. Because the contrast makes total sense. It's like you have to go through this pain to get rid of this pain once and for all. And you have to go through this pain once. That's how the brain works. If it's less than 4x, that's when you start to get objections. And of course, if it's way, way higher, the better. Look here, this is like a 10x gap built. Look how tiny the cost of the solution looks like. Look how tiny, look how irrelevant this is because the pain here is humongous. These two create a situation in the brain of the prospect where it's a no brainer. You present them the solution, you give them the price, it's 5K. They say, okay, great. How do I pay? Boom, done. Because of the emotional gap that we've built. If you don't build enough or a big enough emotional gap, this is what's going to happen. You're going to have value issues in their mind. It's not going to be worth it to invest in the solution. Because when you look at this, the difference is very minimal. And for the brain, it's like, it's not worth it. I might as well stay where I'm at. Even knowing that this problem is recurring, but the brain doesn't understand that. The brain is like, yeah, it's just like, I don't see the point. And that's where you get a lot of value issues. So you want to stay in this side. And until you don't build a big enough gap, you're not done with your discovery phase. They have to get to a place where it makes sense to present them the solution. Otherwise, we would never get there. We'll never get to presenting a solution. This is actually what happens here. When the pain that they have, the cost, the discomfort of the current situation is so low that there's no point in considering this person is presenting them a solution. There's no point. It's like, for example, when someone has very, very little pain, where surgery doesn't even make sense. In this situation, you wouldn't even present the offer. There's no alignment. It's like, hey, based on the problem that you have, like, it absolutely makes no sense for you to even consider surgery. This is massive. The moment I got this, I was like, damn, okay, I get it. Because before I knew about this, I was very rigid and I wasn't really knowing what I was doing on my calls. So the key here is as long as you have this setup here, boom, you're good. Like you don't have to do the rest of the things. Sometimes halfway into discovery, boom, you got it. Great, awesome. You're good on time, perfect. Boom, 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 everything is smoother. Sometimes, depending on the situation, you're gonna have to stay a little bit longer. Cool. So with this in mind, now let's get into the framework and how everything actually works, how we drive the call.